Hello to everyone rolling in. Give people about 10 seconds to figure out the link. Okay, perfect. We can kind of just start with introductory things. So, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning or afternoon. We are MetalMiner, and this is our part of our monthly workshop. So today's topic is going to be best ways to achieve immediate material cost downs in the metal market. So before we start, let's do some quick introductions. My name is Nick Athanas. I'm the Client Services Manager at MetalMiner. We have Lisa Reisman, our co-founder and CEO, Nicole Baston, our forecast analyst, and Don Hauser, Vice President of Solutions and our SEAL analyst. So we'll kick it off to Lisa to begin.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much. We got a lot of material to cover today. We're actually going to try out kind of a new formula for our workshop. So I'm very keen on getting your feedback. If you have any questions over anything that we covered today, go ahead and throw it in the Q&A. I can't promise you that we're going to address it on air now, but we will definitely get back to you for a one-to-one and respond directly to that. So Nick, let's go to the next slide. So who's this workshop for? I mean, really, when we think about our audience, it's really anywhere from mid-sized manufacturers to large manufacturers. And here really working kind of with two different job titles, those in procurement, director of procurement typically, and then increasingly, and not surprisingly, a lot of folks in the supply chain function. So when we think about the folks in procurement and some of the pain points that we hear them talk about on a regular basis, we're really hearing there's a lot of conflicting market signals. There's almost too much information, and there's some sort of hesitation in knowing exactly what to do. And honestly, this presentation today is a little bit counter-cyclical, if you will, in terms of what's happening in the marketplace, right? We're talking about inflation and recession and a lot of that inflation talk. And today the PPI is even higher. And here we're talking about negotiating cost downs, which is almost kind of ahead of trend. But we do think that if we have a slowdown, and you'll see when Nicole starts to talk what's happening from a trend perspective, why we're bringing up this topic now. And increasingly, we're seeing a lot of folks as director of supply chain types. There's basically the problem of, we're seeing a lot of companies with too much inventory right now. 6 months ago, too little inventory, not enough, constant shortages, still shortages as well. There's a lot of unanticipated events. And I think the supply chain function in general is under tremendous pressure to reconsider where are we sourcing from, what do our supply chains look like, what is the optimal mix. Nick, let's go to the next slide. So really, the reason we're doing this now in the month of June is what I'd alluded to before. There's a lot of homework that all of you are going to need to be doing, because it's very difficult to get a cost down after that month has passed, right? So there's a lot of homework to do now. And while demand is still strong, we're kind of suggesting that companies need to start doing this homework for figuring out how are we going to get the cost downs as metal markets come down. They are coming down now. And anytime that you don't act on it now is lost time forever. So whether you decide to implement some of these strategies in the month of August or July or September, getting on that front end of it now, doing your homework, we'll give you all the specifics shortly, is going to be critical. I should mention the note page that you'll want to be taking notes on is on slide 15, and I'll let you know when we get there. Nick, let's go to the next slide. We want to let you know it's not your fault, everything that's happening right now. In fact, we've kind of coined this a new medical condition, supply chain PTSD. And I know you've all experienced it. We haven't talked to a single person in either procurement or supply chain that hasn't had sleepless nights, finding materials, getting parts, having orders being held up because we're missing parts and stuff. So we're really understanding of that. Let's go to the next slide and kind of get into some of the specifics. Sorry. So we've had a lot of price volatility. You all know that. You're seeing that in every commodity across the board. And we have a tremendous amount of price volatility in the metals industry in particular. In some instances, we've got material shortages. In other instances, there's plenty of material laying around. And so discovering those nuances and designing your strategies around that is important. Obviously, we've had a lot of logistics delays. And then on top of that, we have this huge labor shortage, a lot of mixed signals. Nicole's going to talk about that in a moment. And a lot of data and information out there, but not a lot of actionable strategies and what should I do on the basis of that. And so again, that's why we're kind of presenting this sort of counter-cyclical webinar today, even though we are in an inflationary environment. Nick, let's go to slide 6. So one of the things we know that everyone hates is when their service center or their mill is pressuring them to place orders because they know that prices are going up. So we all hate that feeling, and a lot of it is because we're getting information from our suppliers. And so how are you able to kind of, what information are you using to counter some of that is one of the things we'll talk about as well. Let's keep going. Next slide. I think the thing that we see the most, and I talk about this a lot, we talk about noise along with trends. So a major frustration is, everyone has been impacted by what's been happening in the market right now. And it's difficult to know exactly what kind of trend we're in. And Nicole will show this in detail because, again, the macro trend is we're in an inflationary environment. The PPI is going up. That's what affects all of us. And yet metals markets are in that downward trend. And that's the piece that we want to kind of talk through. So it's difficult to know exactly what to do based on that trend. And last but not least, I would say the biggest fear that anyone has in our marketplace is the danger of holding high-priced inventory. Nobody wants to be a member of that club. And we are seeing some alarming signals from some of our customers and prospects in terms of how many months on hand inventory they have. And honestly, that's part of why we're calling that supply chain PTSD. There's a lot of stress that everybody's been facing and concern and worry about not having enough. There's a counter side, of course. There's a flip side to having too much high price inventory. You can run into cash flow problems. It's obviously going to impact earnings, et cetera. And so you're going to have pressure both ways. And we'll talk about kind of balancing that. And with that, I'd like to just switch slides to slide 9 and turn to my colleague, Nicole.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lisa. So at any given point, as Lisa sort of touched on, there's a multitude of factors and drivers that play that can affect metal prices. And often they compete, especially when market signals compete. That's what becomes important to follow the trend rather than get lost in a lot of the noise, because any one of those things can be individually bullish or bearish, but that does not necessarily dictate what's going to happen with prices. So I'm going to do a deep dive, or a very brief one, into the metal prices over the past few years. So to begin, I'm going to direct everyone to the bottom right chart, which is the steel comparison chart between hot rolled coil and cold rolled coil. As you can see, prior to the pandemic, there was a range that was established over a longer time frame over the course of years. And when the pandemic hit, there was that huge shutoff. You see the bullwhip effect come into play, and consumer demand came on, and the market became decidedly bullish. Suppliers struggled to keep on pace with demand and had to vie for material in sort of what felt like scarcity conditions. Mill lead times for steel, something that we follow very closely, extended well beyond average ranges. Those, however, have come down. And as you can see, the trend very much shifted late last year. In the same fashion that it went up, it began to go down. It mirrored that trend. You see a brief inversion following the onset of the war in Ukraine, before prices have now returned downward since late April, and it's decidedly bearish. Now we're going to move over to the aluminum, copper, and zinc chart. You can see zinc peaked a little later. They all sort of operate somewhat individually, the metal prices. But as the world recovered from COVID, you see a very bull trend, kind of like steel, but different. And then at the start of the year, metal prices continued to climb. You see the impact of Ukraine as that happened, followed by a spike associated with the nickel crisis. And in spite of the fact that the war in Ukraine is ongoing, the energy constraints that were some of the drivers of what pushed prices upwards last year remain very much a thing. You start to see that market sentiment is shifting, and the trend is moving downward. It's looking very bullish right now. You see the impact of China's lockdowns in there, and as the largest consumer and producer of metals, their lockdowns have had a significant effect. For aluminum, for example, you see their aluminum production grow, but their demand remains incredibly constrained. And while they signaled intentions to emerge from the lockdown, and you see sort of a brief rebound in prices nonetheless have continued downwards. So I'm going to have you shift to the next slide, if you would. And so part of what a lot of suppliers have felt is they've been operating under what feels like scarcity-like conditions, and that has triggered a lot of fear buying. And it can be very complicated when you're hearing a lot of market noise that could push one in either direction, and certainly a lot of what would sound like very bullish noises. And so that's why it's important to very much follow what's going on with actual price trends. So the shortages that people recall, and as Lisa mentioned, the PTSD that came from grappling with trying to just get material has led now, when prices have fallen, to overbuying and holding on to overpriced inventory. Part of the problem, though, is that the macroeconomic landscape is rapidly evolving, and some of the factors that, like I said, were part of what drove prices upward over the past year, they still remain, but we have some other very bearish drivers that are coming into play. So one of the factors that had pushed prices upwards would be energy prices. And now, even though metal prices have fallen substantially, you see WTI crude prices thread around the $120 per barrel mark. The war in Ukraine also remains ongoing, the resulting sanctions, and the constraints brought on the equation of logistics as that war shifts to a conventional protracted war. Another thing that we think of, and Lisa touched on this, is wide-scale inflation that could lead many to assume that metal prices would be following that same trend. Instead, what we see is metal prices have fallen from their peaks, and consumers have begun. We see this, that in spite of consumer spending increased over the last months, we see consumers shifting how they're spending their money as they grapple with inflated prices. Now, so I'm going to bring it backwards a little bit. And so what matters more than any one of those many factors that was causing some of the price volatility and fluctuation over the past few years is really what's happening with the trend, because at any given time, there are many competing factors that are coming into play in terms of what could shift market sentiment up or down. But what really matters is, what the impact ends up being on prices. And sometimes the prices can fall before any one of those factors tends to dissipate. All right, I'm going to direct it over to my colleague, Don.
Thank you. So I'm going to go through a couple of questions that people generally ask that they think they should be asking, but really there's something deeper and something more meaningful that you should ask. So the big thing is, are we entering a recession? Right? I hear that from just about everybody that I talk to. And it's important to know, but it's not super important. It's what you really want to know is, am I executing the correct strategy for me? There's different things to do in a recession, but really is what you want to look at. Is your material strategy flexible enough to adapt to if we do go into a recession, if demand comes off? Are you flexible enough to make the right decisions and do what's best for your company? Or are you kind of stuck in the panic buying or the security blanket of buying inventory? So that's the first thing. Nick? The second thing kind of goes right into that. Everyone has had these material shortages for at least a year, sometimes 2 years, depending on what market you're in, what material you're buying. And should I continue to build inventory given what has happened in the past, or should I kind of let go of that? What should I be doing there? And is what we're really looking at is the just in case versus just in time. Everyone's familiar with just in time. Everyone's skinning back their inventory as much as possible, limit the carrying costs, those efficiencies. And what should you really be doing with that? And it's really a blend. The just in case scenario is really kind of falling off. There is spots where you need that. There's certain aluminum or stainless materials that are still very tight and very hard to get. You need to carry more inventory in that. But as a whole, it might be time to reevaluate what you're doing as far as a material strategy, just in time versus just in case. Next slide, please. A lot of people have had to expand their supply base. Do I still need an expanded supply base? As it's harder to get material, you go to whoever has it. So now you have all these extra suppliers in your supply base that you might not have had a few years ago. So you're looking at that. Is my current global source worth the risk is what you really need to be looking at. So we really need to evaluate, do I need all of these? A long supply chain, is that really worth it? I might get it low cost or lower cost if I have a longer lead time, but there's really a lot of risk associated with that. A lot of people are really looking at, should I bring it back near shoring? Should I have more domestic options? That's kind of wrap there. Next slide, please. Despite inflation, you need to work on the cost down analysis. This is kind of the overarching theme, and it is a little bit counterintuitive if you think about it, like Lisa touched early. But when it's time to ask for the cost down, you have to do it when the time is right. The longer you wait, you never get that back. And there's always some homework that goes into it. There's some analysis that goes into it. You kind of have to get all your information together to build your business case to go ask for your cost downs. And now we feel like now is definitely the time to put all of that together. I'm not saying that it's time right now to ask for the cost down, but it's time to be prepared for that, because that time is right around the corner as these trends continue down, like Nicole talked about. We're not far off from going to your suppliers and asking for that. So you need to really be prepared now, because the longer you wait, like, you never get that back. If you could have had it today and you didn't ask for it for 2 months from now, you lost those 2 months of savings. It's just how it works. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to hand it to Lisa for the meat of what to do. And this is probably the area that you probably most want to pay attention, maybe take some notes on. Lisa.
Exactly. So these are sort of the tactics, if you will. So a lot of buckets here. I think the key thing is we're kind of almost like I can't help it, but come up with some sort of a consultant framework. So I'm going to kind of walk you through how we look at what are some of the steps you need to take in order to get those cost downs. So then first thing we do under the bucket of, so I'm going to talk about assess first and looking at the word mapping. What do we really mean by that? We really mean, splitting out, in this case, the metal from the other components of cost, including the freight and conversion premiums. So again, now is that time to be doing that, the detailed cost analysis. If you're getting, an all-in number or just one number, I'll say this not so nicely, it's possible you're getting a little screwed with that. So the more that things get rolled together, the more costs get kind of folded into that. And so your job at this point in time is to try to break that out as much as you can. Go back to your suppliers. Hey, help me understand that this is the base price. What am I paying for the conversion premium? Can you break out the freight so you can begin doing that if you're not doing it already? I'm going to move over to the next box under alerting. Know the exact timing of when you took those increases. It's really important. And how does that underlying price compared to where we are now, right? So you really need to model that out. Where did I get that in February? Did I get that price up in March? When did I get it? And what was the price then? What is it now? Okay, moving over into the third bucket on the right, evaluating. And we know some suppliers do this or customers do this. Do you share the up with your supplier? In other words, if your supplier comes back to you and says, look, I got to raise you 10%, of that 10%, did you split that out with them? Like, okay, I'll pay this much and you paid that much. If metal goes up 30% and your price goes up 20%, you need to be thinking about that on the down when you do the down as well. So that's kind of like, I think of the assess line of activities as the internal homework. Then we do a little bit more external scan, right? So we'll move into the analyze row, and the first box, understanding the short-term trends. And this is what Nicole was talking about. What has the market done since you took that increase? What are we up by? What percent is that? And understand what that next 30-day trend looks like. So when we say short-term trends, we mean 0 to 30 days. What's happening in the next month within that price range? And that's kind of what we do at MetalMiner. Secondly, you're going to want to look at that long-term trend. And I think the reason we're having this discussion today, this workshop, is because the long-term trend looks more bearish to us. Whether you have a material agreement contract or not, the base price in case of stainless or the steel value add processing costs, those are the pieces that we're going to be looking at as well. When zinc prices go up, hot dip galvanized prices come up, those adders come up. Do they come down now? It's looking at that kind of analysis, conducting that kind of analysis. And then finally, kind of adjusting your buying strategies, thinking about, okay, what strategies are we going to do? Don talked about this just in time to just in case. Maybe it's time to reevaluate your stock levels. Check when you last adjusted your MRP systems, your safety stock, your buffer stock levels. If you adjusted those up because you couldn't get material, now might be the time to kind of take a look back and say, do we still need to be at those levels, or should we be shrinking that? Maybe don't scale all the way back to your just-in-time norms, but it's probably a little too high now. Demand is lumpy. Some products might remain hot and you can continue kind of what you're doing, and others not so much. I just read this morning about lawn furniture is going to be a great thing to buy this summer because when it was most in need, it wasn't there. A lot was ordered, and guess what? A lot is on the shelves and people aren't buying that. Another strategy or idea that we talked about is this is a good time for procurement and supply chain to go out to lunch with the sales team and find out what your sales folks are hearing in the market, where is the demand coming from, et cetera. So with that, I'm going to convert the presentation back over to Don, who will talk about some of the ACT elements here.
Okay, so can you go back, Nick? So the detailing part kind of goes a little bit into mapping, but a little bit further. So you have to really kind of dig into the details. And that's where you really build your business case to ask for these cost downs. You're looking at your volumes. Lisa talked about talking to your marketing salespeople to see where your sales are coming, looking at that type of volume. One thing that I'm sort of hearing now is, hey, it's hard for me to go back and ask for cost down when my volumes have come down. And that's something that you'll get from your suppliers. Your volumes are going down, you can't get that decrease. It's a good way to push back. It's not really valid, but it's something that you do hear out there. Chances are when your volume was high and you had that economies of scale on the way up, that did nothing for you on the increase. So you should mirror that on the way down too. As your volumes fall off, you should still get the whole decrease coming down. Those are some of the details that you should look at. Cost breakdowns and extras. A lot of people got pushed into, here's your number. Do you want metal? It's this. Take it or leave it, or I'll sell it to somebody else. Now is a good time to really dig into that and break those back apart, deconstruct your pricing. You always have the best leverage if you have everything broken out into different buckets, whether it's material or SG&A, cost extras, all those being broke out. You really need to focus on getting a good handle of that. And then that rolls into your negotiation, right? So you have all those broke out into details. And then it's going to be time to ask for those cost downs pretty soon. We said it's different from market to market, but now is a good time to get ready to ask for those. And then and then you get your savings at the end, right? If you don't do the homework and you just go into a supplier and say, hey, materials down, I want my savings, it's a lot harder conversation. If you're armed with the details and the data, it's a lot easier to get where you're trying to go. And the last two things I'll say on that is, again, you have to ask when the time is right. The longer you wait, those savings just go away. There's no retroactive cost downs, and your suppliers aren't going to come just voluntarily give it to you most of the time. And be a good customer. That's the other thing, is you see your schedules kind of fluctuating. You're burning through your backlog. Feels like, oh wow, everything's really good, but in reality, maybe you're just burning through the backlog, and your sales going forward are getting a little soft. Make sure that you see that. Look at your demand and relay that to your suppliers. That's the other piece of kind of getting your savings there. Nick, can you go to the next slide, please? So there's a couple different ways. There's kind of the traditional follow the market volatility. So it goes up, it goes down, and you're kind of moving all over the place. So you're just kind of along for the ride. That's not really the most effective way to do it. The new way is kind of forecasting that volatility. And there is going to be volatility. It's going to continue to be a very volatile market. It's just what it is now. Try to get out in front of it, look at it. It is forecastable, not that you can get it down to the exact spot that you want to be, but look at the overall trends. Don't get caught in the noise, like Nicole said. Every time there's a price spike, which is going to happen in a volatile market, don't get tricked into thinking the trend is reversed and it's going up. I better lock something in, because you will get those calls. People will try to push you into that. Remember the trend and the strategy that is aligned to that trend for your organization. Next slide, please. Single country sourcing. There was a lot of that used to happen. Just find the best price and just barrel into wherever I can get that best price and just single source it. Now it's kind of a mix. I don't think everything should necessarily be nearshoring or single source. You need that kind of tri-source model. It's always good to have 3 sources if possible. It allows you to maintain a constant supply. It allows you to put somebody in the penalty box, I used to say, so somebody gets kind of beat up and pull some of the business, and then you have to have someone to give it to. So that's how that tri-source model kind of works, and you kind of rotate around the different positions within that tri-sourcing model, and that's what I've seen to be the most effective way. Next slide, please. The just-in-time inventory, we talked about that. Just-in-time versus just in case. We've switched all the way over from, I want 8 hours of inventory on the floor to I want 8 months of inventory on the floor. And the right answer is somewhere in between there. It takes a lot to really kind of switch modes, because you're in that panic, give me everything I can get, to, well, you really need to look at that. We've had people that have come to us and said, hey, I have 12 months of inventory now. Should I keep buying? No, probably should not keep buying. You need to really evaluate what you have and what you need, and make that kind of blend there. Okay, next. I think we're going to kind of run through these.
Skip them.
Yeah,
let's skip them. We're going to run out of time. There's a couple other things we want to get to. Nick, if you get to the summary slide, I think those are the takeaways, and I'll kind of take it from here. So, I think the summary steps, review when you took those increases. I hope the theme you walk away is filter out the noise from the trend. I think that's super important right now. Sharing those cost downs if your supplier shared with you in the cost ups. Set your Goldilocks strategy, requires no more words, adjust your MRP system, etc. Nick, you want to move to the next slide? I want to make everybody aware of a few things that we have resources for you. We have a free monthly, it's our own kind of PPI index. We call it the MMI, different market baskets. Message me on LinkedIn. I'll answer anything. I'm on there all the time. Nick, next slide. And there's some other MetalMiner free resources. A lot of them are free. Our free weekly newsletter. Obviously, our platform is not free, but you can check it out for free. All of our articles and stories are free. I mentioned the MMI report. We also have a lot of how-tos in our resource library that you can take advantage of that give a lot more detail into some of the strategies we talked about today. And with that, Nick, I think I'm turning it over to you.
Great.
wrap it up.
Thank you, Lisa. So in lieu of spending your 30 minutes with us here, we are offering a free strategy call one-on-one with our analyst team. So to contact us to set that up, you need to do that by end of day, and we will be picking a couple of people. So you can contact us a few different ways. This is my direct number, so if you want to reach me there, feel free to do that and leave a message if I don't answer. And this is my email address, so enathanis@metalminer.com. Or feel free to just reach us at the contact us tab on our website. So with that, I think we'll end it here and look out on our LinkedIn page for the next one for July.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.